What's up, everybody? TCM here, back with another video. And if you could see behind me, I am relocating currently. I am in Texas right now. I'm getting all my stuff together, but I don't have everything quite perfect yet. So I'm not going to be on camera a lot today. I'm just going to kind of do some introductions. We're going to run an ad, and then we're going to get into some Active Directory hacking. We're going to talk about LLMNR poisoning. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time. We had a live stream on Wednesday. 2,500 plus of you watched that live stream for Active Directory hacking. So obviously there's some demand there. We're going to put some content out around that. And we're going to start today with LLMNR poisoning. So we're going to take a very quick ad from our sponsor, and then we're going to get right into everything. And hopefully next week we'll have some more content out for you. I'll get this set up a little bit better, and we'll be able to do even more fun stuff with YouTube. So without further ado, let's go ahead and move into Active Directory hacking with LLMNR poisoning. Cyber attacks that leverage weak or stolen passwords, credentials, or secrets are the world's most pervasive cybersecurity issue, and that's why I trust Keeper. Keeper Security's next-gen privilege access management solution delivers enterprise-grade password, secret, and privilege connection management in one unified platform. Unlike legacy PAM solutions, Keeper is fast and easy to deploy, agentless and clientless, and has no implementation fees. Plus, Keeper is FedRAMP authorized. So start your 14-day free trial at keeper.io/TCM. Okay, let's talk about our first attack, and this is probably the most popular and common attack that you're going to run when you're doing an internal penetration test. And this attack is called LLMNR poisoning. This actually stands for Link Local Multicast Name Resolution, though you can just call it LLMNR. Now, what is this protocol? Well, it is used to identify hosts when DNS fails to do so in a network. This used to also be known as MBTNS, though it has been upgraded to LLMNR. In some older networks, you will still see MBTNS, and we can actually detect those both with a single tool. Now, why is this bad? Why do we care? Well, we care because the key flaw here is that when we actually intercept traffic in the network, we're going to be able to capture a username and a hash when we respond to this traffic. Now, this is what is called a man-in-the-middle attack, and we're going to take a look at a deeper dive because this might not make a lot of sense yet. So here's a better example of this attack. Let's say that we have a victim machine, and this victim on the network wants to reach out to a shared folder called Hack Me. Remember, we set this up initially in our Active Directory setup. Well, they fat finger it, they type Hack M instead of Hack Me, and the server is going to say, well, I know about Hack Me, but I don't know about this Hack M you're talking about, so I have no idea what you're talking about. And because the server says this, the victim then goes out and says, hey, does anybody on this network know how to reach this Hack M folder? And this is a broadcast message sent out over the network. If we, in a man-in-the-middle position or attacker-in-the-middle position, are able to intercept that request and respond to that and say, you know what? Actually, I do know where this exists. Go ahead and send me over your hash, and I will actually get you connected to this share. And what happens is the victim will actually send over their hash. And if their hash is weak enough, we can actually take that offline and crack that hash. So to look at this in a real format, let's take a look here. First of all, we're going to run responder. Now the image I have here is a little bit older. This -R that you might see in the image is a little bit deprecated. But the command that you see here, sudo responder -I ton0 -gwp, where I is going to be your interface. So if you're on a VPN, tunnel 0, for example, or if you are on a network, it's typically going to be ETH0. And we'll take a good look at that in the example when we actually get hands-on with this. So we're going to run this tool responder, and responder is going to do exactly what it says. It's going to respond to traffic. So when we get those requests, and by the way, the share folder is just one example. These things fly across the network if LLMNR is enabled. So a good time to run this is going to be early on in the morning or after lunch when people are logging into their computers, generating a lot of traffic. If you're running Nessus scans or vulnerability scans at the same time, not a bad idea. That could generate some stuff. And Responder is going to be a tool that you're very familiar with because it does quite a few different attacks for us. So we're going to start Responder essentially and let that listen for this type of traffic. And when it does sense this type of traffic, it will grab that hash. Now in our lab, because we are simulating traffic here, we are actually going to go out and we're going to go to a file share or try to go to a file share that's going to just actually point to our attacker IP address. In this instance, we're just causing an event to occur. In theory, we're actually pointing ourselves at Responder. When that happens, what's going to happen is we're going to see a hash come through. It's going to look somewhat like this. And when we see that hash come through, we can actually go take that hash and use something like Hashcat in order to attempt to crack it. If the password is weak enough, as we could see here in this example, the password was password1. Well, if it's weak enough, then we can actually crack it pretty easily. And this is a very, very common method of attack because passwords are often very weak. LLMNR is a protocol that is just enabled by default on networks. And this is one of those quote unquote features of Microsoft and Active Directory that is going to allow us to get some quick wins in a network on our internal penetration tests. So from here, we're going to go ahead and jump into our labs. So let's do that. And I'm going to meet you in the next video when we actually walk through this in real time. All right, welcome to your LLMNR lab here. So we are going to capture some hashes now. I am in my Kali Linux machine. In this recording, I am on Kali Linux 2023.2. And I have installed Pimp My Kali, so I have all the tools and everything that I already need. So the tool that we're going to be running in this instance is a tool called Responder. As you saw, it should already be installed by default. If you are running as a low-level user, such as Kali, you can use sudo or you can switch over to root. Regardless, we need to run Responder with elevated privileges. So go ahead and run Responder. We're going to say sudo Responder just like this, and then we're going to do a -I with our interface. So our interface is going to be Ethernet 0, and then we're going to do these switches of DWP. Now before we do that, we're going to just check our IP address. So if we say something like IPA, we can make sure that we are on the same network that we want to be. Remember, I am on 192.168.138, and in this instance, my IP address is 134. So that means I am on the same subnet as the lab build that we set up. Again, whatever lab build that you set up is going to be what you have here. So if you're ever curious what these switches mean, like the D, W, or P here, you can always come into responder --help. So if we do like a sudo responder --help, come in here, we can review what this all means. For example, a lowercase d is for DHCP, and we're going to be answering and responding to DHCP broadcast requests. That's awesome. We also have W for WPAD, so it's going to start a WPAD rogue proxy server for us. If you're not familiar with what WPAD is, that's okay. It does allow a browser to automatically discover a proxy without actually needing additional configurations. So clients are able to locate the URL of the configuration file using DHCP or DNS discovery methods. And this will allow us to capture some hashes as well. We have this capital P, which is newer to Responder with this proxy auth. And so we can actually force authentication for the proxy if we're using it. And WPAD doesn't actually need to be on. So we can run these three. I'm also going to run this with a -V because I have ran this lab before and I have hashes sitting in my log files that are already been captured or have already been captured. So just so you can see them, I'm going to go ahead and add the V. You can add the V as well. If you don't add this, once you capture a hash once, you do not capture that hash again. It'll say, hey, this has already been captured and is being stored. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, hit enter on this. You can see that we are getting our IP address. We always make sure we're using the right NIC and the right IP address here. This is correct. And if we scroll up a little bit, we want to make sure that these are all on. In reality, you might see something off here, but we want to make sure that HTTP is on and SMB is on, and they should be by default. But if you've gone in here and played around or done other attacks and you've messed with the configuration of Responder at any point, make sure that all these are flipped back to on, because we will be messing with these later on when we actually need to flip some of these off. So flip something off. All right. Anyway, so when we come through here and you can see there's already DHCP events happening within this network. Okay, we're getting some events occurring, but we're going to speed this process up a little bit. So what I did was I powered on my Punisher machine here, and I do have access to that. So let's go ahead and get logged into your Punisher machine. And we're going to log in as Frank Castle or F Castle on this. And remember, password 1 is what we set with a capital P. If this is your first time signing in, which it might be for me, it's going to take just a second for everything to get spun up. Yeah, you're going to see the high, everything else that Windows typically goes through, but it's only going to take a second here. So what's going to happen is we're about to simulate an event occurring. We saw this in our PowerPoint slides in the last video, but what we're going to want to do is generate some of that LLMNR traffic. So we're going to fake it just a little bit to show off what the attack actually looks like. So when we get logged in here, we're actually going to go into Explorer and we're going to navigate to our attacker IP address. So while we're waiting, we can actually go ahead and just grab that again. My IP address is this 192.168.138.134. So I'm going to copy that. I don't know if it'll actually let me paste across, but it should. So if you need a second here to pause, go ahead and pause. I'm going to do that myself. And of course, as soon as I paused, it showed up. I'm going to zoom in really quick on this display setting since this is a new user for me. And that way you guys can see everything full screen. All right, so here we go. We're going to go into this and we're going to simulate a little traffic. So I'm going to try to paste this. We'll see. Didn't work. It was worth a shot. Okay, 192.168.138.134 for my attacker IP address. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And if we actually switch back to that machine, you can see that we have now captured hashes. So look at these hashes flying through. We are capturing what is an NTLM v2 hash, all right, v2. And we can see what IP address this came from. We can see what the domain was along with the username, as well as this within this hash here, all right? And honestly, this is a great stopping point. This is the attack. We have captured a hash here. Now, if this password is weak, and we do know that it is weak, we can actually take this and crack this hash, all right? So what I'm gonna do is actually copy one of these hashes. They will all equate to the same thing, even if they're not identical, all right? So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this. And I want to put this into a file. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do something like nano hashes.txt. And I might already have hashes in here. That's okay. What you can do is you can come in here and just paste in your hash. And once that's done, you should be able to just hit Control X and hit Y for yes, and actually save this. So go ahead and get a file named hashes.txt or whatever you want to call it saved with that hash in it, and then hit enter here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to attempt to crack this hash. So we're going to be using a tool called Hashcat. There's also another tool built into Kali called John the Ripper. My preference is Hashcat. Now, before we get into hacking here, or cracking here, I should say, what we need to know is that we are actually about to run hash cracking on a virtual machine. This is pretty much a no-no. You don't really want to do this because it's going to be incredibly slow. I'm going to show you this just as an example from within this because I know it's universal and that we can all do it together. But you may run into issues depending on which version of Kali Linux you're on and depending on what architecture you have. For example, I know in the past with AMD architecture, this has had some issues with Hashcat and actually cracking hashes inside of a VM. So we'll talk about different methods that you can utilize from within the VM, and we'll talk about best practices here. But ultimately, what's happening is inside of a VM, we are running off of our CPU, not our graphics card. Our graphics card is what we want in order to have processing speed in order to crack hashes. In this instance, all we're going to have is our CPU, so it's going to be a lot slower. The better the graphics card you have and the more graphics cards that you have, the faster your cracking will be. So if you work for an organization and they have what's called a cracking rig, Usually that's a bunch of graphics cards stored into one machine with the sole purpose of that machine meant to be cracking passwords. We have a password cracking rig that is just two 4090s currently, and it works pretty well. But I have seen some very, very expensive cracking rigs out there. And now there's even cloud-based hacking and all different kinds of tactics out there. For this, just know that if you're going to want to do actual hash cracking, you should run that on Metal, on the machine that you're actually using your base operating system. If you wanted to run Hashcat, for example, you could go out to the web and just go search Hashcat download. There is a file download to run it on Linux or run it on Windows. Doesn't really matter. I run mine on Windows because that's my base operating system and it works out very well. So now we know we've captured an NTLM v2 hash and we want to actually crack that. What we can do is come in here and type in Hashcat and we can grep out NTLM just like this. And this will be nice to just kind of help us see what is there. So if we do this, and it's probably a -- help actually, I apologize. We can come in here and see, okay, what are the modules here for NTLM? Well, we know that we captured this NTLM v2 hash, and so the module number is 5600 for that. And if you ever need to see this, you can always just come in here and say hashcat -- help, and it will spit out all the modules for you. All of these right here that you're seeing are modules, and they're not really in order, so I like to just actually come in here and do a grep. You could also just go to Google and search what the module is, and there is a website for this, and it works out pretty well as well. So we can just show that off. For example, if we come to Google and we come in here and just look for that, we could say something like hashcat NTLM v2, if we know the hash that we have. And you can look up different results here, or you could do something like hashcat modules, and you'll actually be taken to the hashcat modules page, which this one I believe is in numerical order. So here you go, and then you would just be able to search NTLM v2, for example, and you'll see that, hey, 5600 does pop up here as well. Okay, so with that in mind, what we want to do is we want to provide a hash and a word list for that. And there's a bunch of different examples in here. For now, we're just going to be looking at cracking a hash that we have. And every hash is a little bit different. For example, NTLM v2, it cracks a little bit slower than v1. So if I get a v1 hash, I can do a lot more complex attacks against it and know that I can because it's faster to actually try to crack. So if we look at this and we do something like hashcat, and we know we have a -m of 5600, okay, we have the rest of this here. So we have our hashes file that we want to utilize, and then we have our word list. So we've got user, share, word list, rocku, all right? And this might already be stored in my pot file, which is okay, but we're gonna go ahead and run this, and if it runs back on my side, I'll just run a different command to show you another trick as well. So if we hit enter here, it's going to search for this hash. It actually found this hash because this was unique, and you can see how fast this was. Even on a CPU, we're running here and we got password 1 almost immediately. So we could see 1 of 1 was cracked, and it was very, very fast. This was in Hashcat's defense, or our defense, at the beginning of the list. We only got through 0.03% of the list before it found that password. So that was pretty nice. So let's say, for example, that you actually already had cracked a password. If you're running against big lists and you have a bunch of passwords in there that are already cracked, it usually doesn't spit those out. It'll say, hey, these hashes are already found in the pot file. You can come in here and say, okay, well, just show me those instead. So like a -- show. And we can see that. And here we have password 1, for example, for that hash. So we can actually see the hashes belonging to this if it's already been cracked. As you do more hash cracking, you have what's called a pot file. That pot file grows. So as the hashes become known and the passwords become known, you don't have to crack every single password every single time if you already cracked that password once before. Now with NTLM v2, this hash does change every time you capture it. With v1, it does not. So it just depends on what you're doing, but that pot file becomes very, very valuable. Now with this, I am using a word list of rocku.txt. We've already seen this in the class, but there are some things that we can do here. For example, if yours did not work and you're on a VM, you can try doing -- force. Sometimes that will force the VM to run, or the VM to run Hashcat. Otherwise, you can also go and do this on your base operating system, and this should run just fine, provided you do have the hash list and the word list that you're going to use to crack. Now, some other ideas here that we're not going to go too deep into, but if you are on Metal, running a -O, capital O for optimized is always ideal. That optimizes the speed of the cracking and actually increases the speed of the cracking. So that is nice. There are also better word lists out there. For example, there is a word list called RockU 2021 that has, like, I don't even know how many trillions or whatever is beyond that of passwords in it. And that is a 91 gigabyte file, as opposed to the original RockU, which is, I think, somewhere around 600 megabytes. So it just tells you the sheer size of the file that's there. Another thing that you can do here is you can run this against rules. We're not going to talk about rule sets right now, but a combination of rules and a word list is really nice. So like there's a famous rule out there called one rule to rule them all. And if you download that, it looks like something like this: one rule to rule them all. And you keep that in your folder. You can run a rule set against a password list, and it mutates that password list. So that way you can try new things. I like doing this with RockU. I like doing this with RockU 2021, depending on the hash that I'm running up against. If I'm doing it against a NTLM v2, it's pretty slow. It's going to take a while. NTLM v1 might take a couple hours, for example. So it just depends on the hash that you're running against and how long it's going to take is your strategy here. But for basic examples for this class and for any sort of like CTF or challenge where you need to crack the password, doing it on RockU or using RockU is pretty much a good baseline. When it comes time to actually utilizing this for the real world, you're going to want to look into rule sets. You're going to want to have better password lists. You're going to want to be able to even adapt your password list to what you're cracking. So familiarity with the area or the location is very important. For example, if this is in Pittsburgh in the United States, I know that maybe there are a lot of sports fans out there. So I might try passwords related to the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Pittsburgh Pirates, or I might come up with passwords related to the company name and then start combining those with rule sets and other things that may get me some access to these passwords as well in terms of cracking strategies. Overall, for this course, we're only going to need RockU, and you should start thinking about more strategies as you go and as I'm presenting them, but your baseline foundation is going to be something like this with a -O. You can add rule sets to this, and I do encourage you to explore that as well. But that is the general gist of this. You're going out and you're cracking a hash that you got. If the password is weak, then we will be able to crack it pretty easily. I've cracked up to 20 plus character passwords. Again, just because it's long does not mean that it is complex. You saw that with the my password that we put together, that we haven't cracked it yet, but for our service account, it's going to be a long password of 14 characters, but it's not really that complex. So keep that in mind as you're going through this, but I just wanted to introduce you to the concept right now. And as we move forward, we'll look through a little bit more strategy and reinforce some of the things that we're learning. All right, let's briefly talk about remediation or mitigations for LLMNR poisoning. So really it comes down to disabling LLMNR and NBTNS, and you could do that through group policy. Now you do not have to follow along here. I just want to give you an example and show you. So if I come into Windows Server here and I go into our group policy management, and this is similar to what we did with disabling Windows Defender. I can come in here and add a new policy. Just for simplicity, I'm just going to edit an existing policy. I'm not even going to push these changes, all right? So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I am following the directions, which tell me that I need to go into our administrative templates, and I need to go into network here. Within network, there's a DNS client, and all the way at the bottom of this, we see turn off multicast name resolution. All we would do would be enable that. We would hit apply and OK, and then we would push that policy out to the network. Very straightforward. Okay, going back to this, what if we can't do that? For some reason in our network, we have to have LLMNR enabled or NBTNS. So what happens then? Well, we can require network access control. If you're not familiar with what that is, that's when, hey, I go and plug a device into the network. Well, that should be permitted on the network. We shouldn't have it just allowed to plug and play, plug and get internet. There should be some permission settings like MAC address, for example, where it says, hey, yes, this MAC address is allowed on the network. Now, there are bypasses for network access control, but this is a great start for security. And we should be requiring strong user passwords. That will help defeat the ability to actually crack these passwords. And we could utilize that instead of turning off LLMNR, though we should just turn off LLMNR. So we have a couple of strategies there. Again, with the long passwords, just because they're long doesn't mean they're complex. So you should have complex passwords there as well, limiting common word usage. And you should have really good password policy regardless of your LLMNR in your network. So that is it for this video. If you enjoyed the video, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, my name is Heath Adams, aka the Cyber Mentor, and I thank you for joining me.